Warming the place where you live. Two mad dogs. When my friend Amy tells me what her dream relationship looks like, she describes the one she's in right now. Fundamentally, he's accepting. He celebrates the person I am and gives me plenty of room to do my thing. The last thing he would want to do is control me. Now that's a big deal for Amy because she knows exactly what the opposite kind of relationship looks like. When Amy met her now ex-husband, she was young, in her early 20s, but even then she exhibited the qualities that make her a strikingly unique person today. She had a tendency to express herself freely, sometimes with fiery opinions, sometimes with childlike humor. She always seemed self-possessed, a person who knew her own mind and felt confident in her abilities. Amy married a young man who she regarded as the smartest person she'd ever met. Their relationship was fun and freewheeling, full of adventures and debates. Her husband seemed to enjoy her company more than anybody else ever had. But relatively early on, there were signs of trouble. Amy's husband didn't really like her spending time with people other than himself. He also showed a tendency to conceal information or even tell lies when the truth might cause Amy to take actions he didn't want her to take. Sometimes, when they had conflict, he reacted in ways that disturbed or deeply wounded Amy. He hurled acidic insults, assumed physically intimidating postures, led her down disoriented verbal mazes, and encouraged long periods of silent treatment. All of these behaviors eventually caused Amy just to shut down. Her submission to his tirades seemed to be the only way she could stop the overwhelming and intimidating stimuli flowing from him to her. She would accept his conclusions or change her plans to suit his whims. But that wasn't all. A few years after Amy was married, she took a job at a large company where she was quickly singled out as the ideal assistant for a hard-working executive. She and the executive seemed to get along like gangbusters. He liked her penchant for telling it like it was, or at least she was fairly certain it was. And although she wasn't thrilled to play the ultra-feminine hostess role that an assistant often is expected to assume, Amy enjoyed discussing strategy with her boss. The company gave her a cell phone so that her boss could contact her whenever he needed to. And slowly but surely, those times of need began to increase. He began to phone and text Amy at all hours of the day. Now, that's hardly an unusual arrangement for executives and their assistants, but the rules in this situation weren't as typical. Amy's boss once told her that he hated the very word boundaries, and during the years that she worked for him, he proved that he meant it. He told Amy that under no circumstances was she allowed to turn off her phone. If she was going somewhere without cell phone reception, she needed to clear it ahead of time with him and explain where she was going and what she was doing. He insisted that he would become anxious and stressed if he were not able to reach her at any time or receive a speedy response from her. Amy had to answer all texts and calls with relative immediacy. If she didn't, she would suffer anxious and angry reactions from her boss. This usually entailed a multiple hour-long torturous discussion that was similar to the sort she was having with her husband. Amy's boss simply needed her to be always available to him, whether or not it was for a work-related task or for a therapeutic conversation to soothe his anxiety. It was easier to be controlled by her boss via her phone than to endure more browbeatings than she absolutely had to. Eventually, Amy learned to always pick the path of least resistance. She learned to grit her teeth and keep her thoughts and feelings to herself. Above all, she learned to comply as often as she could with the unreasonable expectations being made. Today, when Amy reflects on her 20s, the decade she was married and worked as an assistant, she describes herself during those years as a woman tethered together to two mad dogs. The way she describes it, each hand was attached to a different leash and a different dog, she says. They pulled me everywhere I went, and often in completely different directions. My life was about trying to keep myself together while being pulled apart by two insistently controlling and needy men. That's a dire situation for anybody. But here's the thing about Amy. One of her core values is freedom. In her F.I.R.E.S notes, you'll read, briefly describe the first things that come to mind when you contemplate the purpose or purposes you feel drawn to fulfilling. Don't overthink it, just write. Amy writes, I believe in creating the conditions for others and myself that support maximum freedom. I agree with Nelson Mandela when he said, the sun never set on a human achievement as freedom. I am drawn to living a life that is as independent as possible, and I want to support causes that allow others to live with self-determination and self-expression, free from oppression and fear. For Amy, living under conditions of unreasonable control, oppression, and fear was antithetical to her core values, values she had accepted at a young age. As you can imagine, the life she led in her 20s did not allow for much intentional tending to her spiritual fire. Every day meant walking through an inferno that felt devoid of meaning or purpose. All of that changed when she reached age 30. Now, her marriage ended under terribly challenging circumstances. A couple of years later, she summoned up the courage to quit her job. She endured a dry, lonely, disorienting period of resembling the somewhat fragmented pieces of her personality. But she eventually emerged with her cardinal qualities of independence, creativity, and curiosity intact and stronger than ever. And her core value of freedom found new ways to express itself. As she grew stronger, Amy did find ways to support freedom in her community. Her external fire is currently roaring away, preparing exactly the type of fuel she wants to share with people who need to develop confidence in self-determination and self-expression. Moreover, in her metaphorical home, the places she frequents and the people that she sees every day, a beautiful relational fire is burning, providing safety, warmth, and comfort. As you can tell by the way Amy describes her current most intimate relationship, that relational fire burns with a special fuel, a love that seeks to support her rather than control her. The freedom she values so highly is feeding into the kind of nurturance she craves the most. And I know she feels that the sun never set on so glorious a love as the one she has now.